I never thought I would be emotionally affected by a creature that once stared at a wall for 20 minutes straight, yet there I was, standing in my living room, feeling personally rejected by my own cat. His name was Milo, a gray ball of fur with an attitude that suggested he paid rent and I was merely a guest. For years, we had an unspoken agreement. I fed him, cleaned his litter, and respected his personal space, and in return, he tolerated my existence and occasionally blessed me with affection. That morning, however, something was different. I woke up like any other day, stretched and instinctively reached down to pet Milo, who usually slept curled up near my feet. My hand met empty space. Confused, I sat up and found him sitting across the room, facing away from me, tail wrapped tightly around his body. I called his name softly, expecting at least an ear twitch. Nothing. He didn't look at me, didn't move, didn't acknowledge that I existed at all. At first, I laughed it off. Cats were weird. Everyone knew that. Maybe he was in one of his moods. I got out of bed, went to the kitchen, and opened his food cabinet. Normally, that sound alone summoned him like magic. This time, nothing happened. I poured his food, the same brand, same flavor, same bowl, and placed it on the floor. Milo stayed exactly where he was, staring at the wall like it had personally offended him. That's when a strange feeling settled in. This wasn't normal cat indifference. This was deliberate. This was cold shoulder behavior. I tried again, using the high-pitched voice I swore I would never use in front of other humans. I crouched down, patted the floor, and invited him over. He slowly turned his head, just enough to show me one eye, then deliberately looked away again. The message was clear. I had done something wrong. I spent the rest of the morning trying to identify my crime. Had I forgotten a treat? Changed his schedule? Looked at another cat online? The more I thought about it, the worse it felt. Milo wasn't just ignoring me. He was making a point. Every time I entered a room, he left it. Every time I sat down, he relocated to the farthest possible corner. It was like living with a tiny furry ghost who wanted me to suffer. By the afternoon, I realized something unsettling. I cared, way more than I should have. I checked his litter box, refreshed his water, even opened a new can of food as a peace offering. He ate it without looking at me, his back still turned, as if accepting the food did not mean forgiving the hand that served it. That's when it hit me. My cat had officially given me the cold shoulder, and I had no idea how to fix it. By the second day, the situation had escalated from confusing to emotionally disturbing. Milo had upgraded his behavior from passive ignoring to strategic avoidance. If I entered the room, he left. If I sat down, he relocated. If I reached out, he vanished like smoke. It felt less like living with a pet and more like being silently judged by a roommate who knew all my secrets. The worst part was that he was doing it calmly, without aggression, without noise, just pure calculated distance. I started observing him like a detective trying to solve a crime. His ears were fine, his tail wasn't puffed, his appetite was normal, and his eyes were alert. This wasn't illness, this was personal. Every small movement felt intentional, like he was proving a point. When I tried to sit next to him on the couch, he stood up, stretched slowly, and walked away without even glancing at me. That hurt more than any scratch ever could. Desperation slowly crept in. I Googled things I never thought I would type. Phrases like, why is my cat ignoring me? And what does it mean when a cat suddenly becomes distant? The internet, as expected, offered no comfort. Some articles said cats need space. Others suggested I had violated a boundary without realizing it. A few dramatic posts implied emotional betrayal, which somehow felt accurate. I scrolled endlessly, hoping for a clear answer that didn't exist. I replayed the last few days in my head, searching for the moment everything went wrong. Then I remembered it. The incident. 2 nights ago, I had moved his favorite blanket off the couch so I could sit comfortably. At the time, it seemed harmless. Now it felt like a crime against royalty. That blanket was more than fabric. It was territory. It was trust. And I had violated it without hesitation. Armed with this realization, I attempted reconciliation. I placed the blanket back exactly where it had been, smoothing it carefully like a peace treaty. I stepped back and waited. Milo approached slowly, sniffed it, sat down, and then, without acknowledging me, turned his back once again. The message was brutal. The damage had been done. As evening settled in, the house felt unusually quiet. Milo chose to sleep in the other room, something he had never done before. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the absence of his familiar presence. It was ridiculous, I knew that, but it felt like being iced out by someone you loved. That night, I realized that earning forgiveness from a cat might be harder than earning it from a human, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what that would require. By the third day, I had entered a new phase of grief, acceptance mixed with hope. I stopped chasing Milo around the apartment and decided to pretend I was completely unaffected, which was obviously a lie. Still, I followed the advice I had read everywhere and gave him space. No forced petting, no baby voice, no dramatic apologies whispered into his fur. I acted normal, even though nothing about the situation felt normal at all. Milo, on the other hand, acted like a master of psychological warfare. He positioned himself just close enough to be seen, but far enough to be unreachable. He would sit on the arm of the couch while I sat at the opposite end, staring straight ahead as if I didn't exist. Occasionally, I caught him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking, and the moment our eyes met, he looked away. That small action somehow hurt the most. I tried to rebuild trust through routine. I fed him on time, cleaned his litter box meticulously, refreshed his water, and resisted the urge to overcompensate. I even played with him using his favorite toy, dragging it across the floor without directly engaging him. He participated, but always kept his distance, playing with the toy, not with me. It felt like cooperation without forgiveness. Later that evening, something small but important happened. As I sat on the floor reading, Milo walked past me slowly, not away from me, not avoiding me, just past me. His tail brushed lightly against my leg for half a second. It wasn't affection, but it wasn't rejection either. I froze, afraid that any movement might undo the moment. When he continued walking without incident, I realized that this was progress, however tiny it seemed. That night, he chose to sleep in the same room again, not on the bed, but nearby. I listened to his quiet movements in the dark, feeling strangely relieved. The cold shoulder hadn't fully melted, but it had cracked. For the first time since it started, I felt like there was a way back, even if it would take patience, humility, and a deeper respect for the unspoken rules of cat loyalty. The fourth day felt like walking on thin ice that could crack at any moment. I had learned my lesson and moved through the apartment carefully, as if Milo's mood controlled the laws of gravity. I no longer sat on his spots, touched his things, or adjusted anything that even remotely belonged to him. Every action was calculated. I wasn't just living with a cat anymore. I was negotiating with one. Milo seemed to notice the change. He stopped dramatically leaving rooms when I entered, though he still refused to acknowledge me directly. Instead, he adopted a new strategy, existing peacefully in the same space while acting like I was furniture. He would groom himself nearby, stretch casually, and nap in visible places, all without giving me the satisfaction of eye contact. It was progress, but on his terms. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, completely ignoring him as advised by every article I had read. Without warning, Milo jumped up beside me. My heart stopped. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stared straight ahead, pretending I was deeply invested in absolutely nothing. He sat there for a full minute, close enough that I could feel his warmth. Then slowly he lay down, still not touching me, but close enough to remind me of what I had lost. Minutes passed. Then his paw touched my leg. Lightly. Accidentally. Maybe on purpose. I stayed still, terrified of ruining the moment. Eventually he shifted again, settling more comfortably, his body now pressed against my side. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it wasn't no longer punishment. It felt like a ceasefire. That evening, Milo followed me into the kitchen for the first time since the incident. He sat nearby as I prepared his food, watching calmly instead of turning his back. When I placed the bowl down, he ate normally, glancing up at me once, just once, before continuing. That single look felt heavier than any meow ever could. As night came, he climbed onto the bed, choosing his usual spot near my feet. I didn't touch him. I didn't speak. I just let him exist beside me. Lying there in the dark, I realized something important. The cold shoulder wasn't cruelty. It was communication. Milo wasn't punishing me. He was reminding me that trust, once disturbed, takes time to rebuild. And for the first time, I felt like I had earned my place back, even if full forgiveness was still one step away. By the fifth day, the tension in the apartment had almost completely dissolved, though I was still careful not to take anything for granted. Milo moved freely again, no longer avoiding me, no longer staging dramatic exits when I entered a room. He didn't suddenly become extra affectionate, but he returned to his normal self, which somehow felt more meaningful than exaggerated attention. The cold shoulder had officially thawed. That morning, as I sat on the couch drinking coffee, Milo jumped up beside me without hesitation. He turned around twice, the universal sign of preparation, and settled directly against my leg. I waited, still cautious, until he leaned in further and pressed his head lightly into my side. That small gesture erased days of anxiety in a single moment. I reached down slowly and scratched behind his ears, and this time he didn't pull away. He purred. The sound filled the room, familiar and comforting, like everything had returned to its proper place. In that moment, I understood that the cold shoulder had never been about anger. It was about boundaries. I had unknowingly crossed one, and Milo had responded in the only way he knew how, by withdrawing. Once I respected his space and acknowledged his territory, he allowed me back in. The experience changed how I looked at our relationship. I became more attentive, more respectful, and more aware of the small routines that mattered to him. His favorite spot stayed untouched, his schedule stayed consistent, and I learned to ask with patience instead of assuming access. Looking back, it was both ridiculous and meaningful. Being ignored by my cat had taught me more about respect and trust than I expected. Milo never needed words to communicate his feelings, and when he finally forgave me, he did it quietly, on his own terms. As he slept beside me that night, warm and content, I realized that earning back a cat's trust might be one of the most humbling experiences a person can have, and I wouldn't forget that lesson anytime soon. Even after things returned to normal, I couldn't shake the awareness that something fundamental had changed between us, not in a bad way, but in a deeper, more respectful way. I found myself paying closer attention to Milo's behavior, noticing the subtle signals I had ignored before. The way his ears angled when he wanted space, the slow blink that meant trust, the quiet way he chose proximity without demanding attention. I realized that our relationship had levels I had never bothered to understand until the day I almost lost his trust. Days turned into weeks, and Milo settled back into his routines, but now they felt shared rather than assumed. When he chose to sit near me, I appreciated it instead of expecting it. When he walked away, I didn't take it personally. That shift changed everything. Our interactions became calmer, more intentional, and oddly more affectionate than before. It was as if respecting his independence made our bond stronger instead of distant. Sometimes I caught myself smiling when he ignored me briefly, because I understood now that independence was part of who he was. He wasn't being cold, he was being a cat, and I wasn't entitled to his affection, I was invited into it. That distinction mattered more than I ever imagined. Late one evening, as Milo curled up beside me and fell asleep, I realized the cold shoulder hadn't been a rejection, it had been a lesson. It taught me patience, awareness, and respect in a way only a silent, stubborn, furry teacher could. And as I sat there listening to his steady breathing, I knew that whatever bond we had now was stronger, quieter, and more real than before. By the 7th part of this story, I had fully accepted that Milo was not just a pet, but a personality with rules I would never completely master. What surprised me was how naturally those rules began to influence my behavior outside the apartment. I became more patient in conversations, more aware of unspoken boundaries, and less reactive when attention wasn't immediately returned. Somewhere between respecting a cat's space and earning it back, I had learned to slow down. Milo, of course, remained blissfully unaware of the personal growth he had triggered. He continued his routines with quiet confidence, choosing moments of closeness with precision. When he wanted affection, he demanded it boldly, climbing onto my lap or headbutting my hand until I responded. When he didn't, he simply existed nearby, reminding me that presence alone could be enough. That balance felt healthier than constant validation ever could. One afternoon, I realized something small but symbolic. I had sat down on the couch, leaving his blanket untouched without even thinking about it. Respect had become automatic. Milo noticed, too. He hopped up, circled once, and settled beside me, his tail flicking lazily, as if approving my continued education. I smiled, understanding that trust, once repaired properly, doesn't need constant reassurance. The cold shoulder that once felt like rejection now felt like a quiet initiation. Milo had taught me how to listen without words, and how to value affection because it was chosen, not guaranteed. As he slept beside me, completely at ease, I understood that this wasn't just a story about a cat ignoring me. It was about learning that the strongest bonds are built on patience, awareness, and the humility to accept that love is always given on its own terms. By this point, life with Milo had settled into a rhythm that felt more intentional than ever before. The apartment felt calmer, not because anything physical had changed, but because I had changed how I moved through it. I no longer assumed access to his affection or space. I waited, observed, and responded instead of acting first. It was strange how such a small shift created such a big difference in how peaceful everything felt. Milo seemed to thrive in this new balance. He followed me from room to room again, not closely, not clingy, but present. When I worked, he sat nearby. When I rested, he chose a spot within sight. His presence became steady rather than conditional, and that consistency felt like trust in its purest form. I realized then that trust doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up quietly and stays.
There were moments when he tested me, stopping short of my reach, watching to see if I would respect the distance. Each time I did, he eventually closed the gap himself. Those moments taught me that patience isn't passive, it's active restraint. It's choosing not to take when something is offered slowly. One evening, as I sat on the floor organizing things, Milo walked up and placed one paw on my leg, then another, then climbed fully into my lap without hesitation. There was no ceremony, no warning, just choice. I stayed still, letting him settle however he wanted. He purred softly, a sound that now felt earned rather than expected. In that moment, I understood something clearly. The cold shoulder had been a reset, not a punishment. It reminded me that relationships, even with animals, are built on consent, awareness, and respect. Milo hadn't changed. He had simply required me to grow. And as he rested there, calm and trusting, I knew that lesson would stay with me long after the memory of being ignored had faded.